So starting off, when we look over to the CDC's page here and we scroll down, we see that the last nowcast estimate was from January 18th, 2025, which was over 2 weeks ago. They update bi-weekly, so they did not update this Friday. This is probably a result of the executive order that Trump passed, which was putting a freeze on the human health and services, which the CDC is a part of. I think if you scroll all the way down to the page down here, it'll tell us, yeah, human health services, CDC is a part of that. So we have a minor pause in this. It's unclear how long this pause will last for in terms of COVID variants, but we do have a slight sigh of relief. So if we go here and we click this link, it will open it over here. We'll scroll down to this map. We see that the map did in fact update. The data is from January 13th to January 27th. Typically, we'd expect to see January 31st, so they probably just collected data until the executive order kicked in. Even though it started over a week ago, they probably were forced, I'm guessing, on the 27th, a few days back. So we did get a wastewater update. We didn't get a COVID variant update, which shows that the website is slowing down. So we'll have to wait and see if we get continued wastewater updates or if this will also be frozen by next week. We'll have to wait and see. We just don't know at this point. So we're looking to this map. Anything that is red or orange is going to be very high levels of wastewater. What they do is an absolute scale. So 0% would be the lowest that's ever been recorded at that wastewater facility. And anything that is dark red is going to be the highest or within the highest range that's ever been recorded at that facility. And as we see in this map here, if we zoom in a little bit, we see that in the Northeast and the Midwest that there are very high levels all throughout the country. And before we weren't seeing as much at the orange and red in the West and in the South, but we're starting to see some places pop up in Florida, in Texas, and then over here in California. So that's interesting. I'm starting to wonder if we're going to hit a chaotic state. So previously, everywhere in the US has sort of been going continuously up and down, but California, as we'll see later on, is a little weird this year. It hasn't peaked with the rest of the United States, and we do typically have a spatiotemporal spread where it starts in the Northeast, moves through the middle of the country, hits the West, and then sort of rebounds into the North and then the South. That's usually the flow of things, but this year we're having a lot in the Northeast and the Midwest, but we haven't really had anything much in the South and the West as of yet in terms of COVID spread, COVID detected in the wastewater. So that's very interesting. And this could start to mean that we're hitting a chaotic state where different places in the country are going to have very unique patterns of spatial spread. So we're going to have to keep our eyes on that. Next, we're going to look over to the CDC's epidemiologic growth estimates. So if we scroll down to COVID-19, that also updated as of January 28th, 2025. And it looks like it's increased once more. We were around 78% likely growing. Now we're about 81% likely growing COVID estimates, where it's growing in 20 states, declining or likely declining in 7 states, and not changing in 21 states. So we see that we're seeing increases in the Northeast, the South, and the West. So that's very interesting that we're starting to see sort of this wide spatial spread. This would indicate that we're really in that third phase that I've talked about before. But the interesting thing is that if we switch over to the wastewater real quick, this is just a brief showing. I'm not going to dive into it just yet. But we see that we don't really have those increasing levels that we're seeing in California despite this epidemiologic change. But that's where it's important to understand where the base of this data is coming from, and it's from emergency department visits. So if they have a probability estimate greater than 1, that's going to be an increasing growth in the epidemic state. So they're starting to see an increase in people visiting the emergency department, and that's what these purple are indicating. And then we'll switch over to the COVID respiratory illness tracker, their dashboard. And we'll see that while emergency department visits in the US are low, the wastewater viral activity in the US is high. And this is, in my opinion, the more important measure because this is showing the community transmission at the time. So we have very high spread of COVID. We also have very high spread of flu and moderate spread of RSV. That's starting to head down. but flu is still increasing and COVID is still very high. So this is likely what you're going to be infected with if you're going to be infected at this time. Now, let's move on to New York State and their COVID wastewater surveillance program there. We see that they last updated on January 31st, 2025. They're a state-funded, state-run program. So despite the emergency orders, they should still be collecting and distributing their data publicly, and they have been. So what we see here is that nothing in New York State is at low levels, despite what the CDC may show. New York State is showing no, we are not at low levels based off the wastewater concentration for COVID. The majority of facilities are at moderate levels for wastewater. But for the ones that are at high levels, this totals about 57 facilities. And these 57 facilities divided by the 144 actively reporting sewer sheds brings it to about 40% are reporting at the highest levels currently, predominantly down here and over here in New York. And this is slightly down from, I think, about 42 or 45% last week, so it's a small decrease. And finally, moving over to wastewater scan and the 28 reporting wastewater facilities to wastewater scan in California, we're seeing that things are pretty much holding at a moderate level of COVID in the wastewater. So it's hasn't really hit a winter wave just yet, which is very weird because if we switch over to the rest of the US, over here we see that there has been a winter wave in the majority of the Northeast and in the Midwest. However, this hasn't really hit the South or the west of the country just yet. So this is kind of unusual. But from the epidemiologic growth, it's showing that COVID is starting to increase. So maybe it's going to start heading up in California. Very, very unusual. You can see that there just hasn't really been a winter wave experienced in California just yet. Again, this might be an indication that we're starting to go out of phase with the country in California, where the Northeast and the Midwest are starting and have had a full wave essentially at this point. California hasn't started yet, so maybe California is going to get hit later in this winter. So like in the early February, March, maybe we're going to start to experience that wave. Who knows? This is a uncharted territory essentially. We haven't seen this before. So moving on to the rest of the U.S. This is the 148 reporting wastewater facilities to wastewater scan throughout the U.S. And you can see that things have gone up. They're starting to trend down a little bit, but let's zoom in to see what's happening at the majority of facilities. So you can use this scroll bar here, and then you can adjust the axes here so you can get a better view. So let's go in. And it looks like a vast majority of facilities are trending down. Some aren't going up, but the majority is constant. So I would say we're kind of in a holding pattern right now, where the trend is downwards, but the vast majority of facilities and locations in the US are sort of holding at constant levels. So that's pretty interesting. So I guess for the overall trend, we can say that it's starting down, but that it's not necessarily an indication that it will continue down, that it might trickle back up a little bit. So we're sort of in a wonky time for real-time data analysis, like what I do. But yeah, so the trend is starting to go down a little bit, might head back up. But again, there's the curveball in California where they haven't really hit it yet. So the West hasn't experienced it yet. The South hasn't really experienced this winter wave yet. So we might see the Northeast and the Midwest go down while we start to see the South and the West go up. And in that case, it would seem like everything is sort of holding in a holding pattern for the entirety of the US because of that. So we might be going out of phase. That might be something that's happening. And yeah, so that's our roundup for the week of January 31st, 2025. Have a good one.